Hey everyone, Joe Carroll here. Excited to be with you guys today because we are going to have a blast working on an all-time classic song, and I'm very grateful and happy that you guys could join us. With the help of SSL, we captured this band and the vocals using nothing but their preamplifiers. So we have the SSL 9000 channel strip, the 4000 channel strip, the Harrison 32C, as well as the Pure Drive, the Octo, the 8-channel version of the Pure Drive. So everything that you hear will have been recorded through that. In fact, what I'll do is when I export these tracks for you guys to download, I'll name them 9K, 4K, 32C, or Pure Drive, or Octo, or something like that. Just so you guys know what is what, in case you're like, that sound, I got to have that sound. But that said, I want to talk about the mix process a little bit and kind of show you what I'm going to do to create what you heard already. And that is, I wanted to kind of keep this. You got to think this was recorded in 1976 and hit the radio in 1977. And no automation, no automated consoles. Everything was recorded to analog tape and then mixed to analog tape with analog consoles. Like it was a different time. It was really hands on the faders in real time, right? So what I wanted to do is kind of just do my back to the basics type of simplistic approach. That said, let me kind of show you what we have going on. So we have the 32 Classic, and the reason I chose the 32 Classic today is to keep it all in the Harrison SSL family. Is Harrison actually has a connection to Fleetwood Mac. The record right after this one, Tusk, actually was, I believe it was mixed. I don't know if it was recorded and mixed or just mixed on a Harrison 32 channel console back then. So they already have the connection with Fleetwood Mac, so I just thought it'd be fun. But you'll see a very minimum, a couple, an 1176 here, some tape machine. One modern tool that I did use though on the bass is a multi-band compressor. We'll talk about that. Little tape on the input of the guitars, just because they're a little dynamic, and Lindsay's guitar was very kind of muted sounding. Really, it wasn't. It didn't. I mean, it was dynamic, but it wasn't sharp. If that makes any sense, it wasn't shrill. And then on the vocals, we have the 32C going into various compressors. So you have the LA2A. 1176. It looks like I had some different options here, but didn't use all of them. And then our stereo bus, and that is it. So where I'm at right now, because I'm not done, let's just kind of take off and let's see. What I'll do is I'll kind of stop as things come to me that I want to talk about. The first one being the bass guitar. When I listened to the original, before I started mixing, I wanted to listen to the original. I didn't want to copy it per se, but I wanted to honor it, right? And just kind of refresh myself on what they did. And that said, there's surprises, right? Because even though we've heard some of these songs a million times, literally, most of the times we listen to them, they're in passing. And we don't have our producer's brain on. We're not in our studio in our sweet spot with $9,000 speakers staring down at our ears. And so there's things that it's like, oh, I didn't realize. And one of them was the bass guitar. The bottom octave and a half, let's say everything under about 50, 60 cycles, was not very tight, by today's standards. It's kind of loose and flopping around, and it's big. I mean, there's a lot of like, subs rolling around back there. But let me show you what I did to kind of modernize it a little bit. So I used this more modern tool, multi-band compressor here, and you'll see that the bass is the low end only is being compressed right around 250. It looks like 280 cycles. Everything below there is getting compressed a couple dB, just so it's tightening just a little bit. Let me show you without it. In fact, I'll take the 32 Classic off as well. So you definitely hear that rumble at 50 cycles and maybe even a little below there. Now let's check it out with this. You still hear that frequency, it's just tighter. And then what I did to follow that up is I used this guy with a high pass filter at 30 cycles, and I actually brought this guy down too, just to get rid of some noise floor, of stuff we didn't need. And I'm also adding a significant bit of the 2K. So let me show you before and after of these two guys. So the bottom end is tighter. You hear the effect of that drive. You absolutely hear a little bit of grit, and that grit is representing itself really well in that 2K area. So it's going to help it cut through the track just a little bit. To the sound of your loneliness, like a heartbeat drives you mad. Oh, that's another one that jumps out to me. So Stevie's vocal. When you listen to Stevie's vocal, first of all, she's Stevie. She's freaking amazing in every way, right? But that was the scratch vocal. They were intending to go back and re-record it, in more isolation with a different microphone, the whole 9 yards. And although I think she actually fell in love with the Sennheiser 441, and that was, I believe, what kind of became her go-to, maybe moving forward on other records, even for the final vocal, which is interesting because you think U47s and everything else that was available at that time. She chose the 441. That said, it's very rangy. I'm not talking about pitch. Let's call it dynamic, both in terms of volume as well as the tonality, right? Like it gets really bright at times and it just really jumps out at you. And there's other words that seem very distant, because she's just not singing out very loud. So the amount of compression that they didn't use or didn't have access to, who knows? But no, I do actually know. It's the scratch vocal. So the drums and things are bleeding into it. In fact, the snare drum sound is bleeding into it so much that Ken Kayley says that it's a significant part of the final drum sound is the snare drum, that ghosting in the center where Stevie is of the more distant bleed snare, which is really, really clever. So the more compression you would have used, the more it would have brought out a lot of cymbals and snares and things. So they were probably limited on what they could do. And again, we didn't have automation, right? So the vocal is very dynamic. But so to kind of, do something a little more modern, but at the same time, let's call it inspired by the album. You'll see EQ wise, not doing much. 200 cycles, about 216. I'm ducking about 2.5 dB. I'm adding about 4 dB of 10K. And that's not as much as you think. Remember, a Harrison is just kind of soft, so you can really get aggressive with it. So it's not as much as, if you use a Neve circuit, maybe you don't go this high, for example. And a high pass filter set to around 200 cycles, because she was, at least my version of Stevie, was getting, kind of dark and woolly in some of those areas. So, but now let's talk about the compression, because I had a clean vocal recording that I could do anything I wanted to. I could use a lot of compression and, make it very modern and ultra squished, but it doesn't sound, I tried that. And you know what? It doesn't sound like it's supposed to. Our ears are so influenced by Stevie's performance, even whether we knew it or not, that you get the ultra modern compressed vocal, and it wasn't working. So let me show you what I did. I brought the virtual mix rack up here with a 2A and some de-essing afterwards, and here's what we ended up with. To the sound of your loneliness. In fact, what I'll do is I will put it actually in the band and let you kind of see how much compression is happening. Your loneliness, like a heartbeat drives you mad, in the stillness of remembering what you had and what you lost and what you had. So absolutely. Will I get in there like when she said, "Ooh, I'm gonna dig some of that stuff out with automation, that we can." But I'm probably not gonna beat this to death with compression. You'll see, by today's standards, that's not very heavy, right? There's a lot of going between 2 to 4, maybe reaching 5. That's not all that heavy because you'll see I didn't compress it all that heavy during the tracking. I mean, you can see that there's some compression there, but it's not all that heavy. And then let's talk about the stereo bus for a moment because there's several things going on. And what I'll do is I'm just gonna mute it all. And let's like this was here from the beginning, so I'm mixing into it. So this will affect your balances. So a little bit of vintage drive because I wanted that analog saturation. In fact, what I'll do is I'll play it with and without, just so each step of the way you hear kind of what each one is adding to the equation.
It's only right for you to play the way you feel it. Well, listen carefully to the sound.
You'll hear some density, but you'll also hear the for whatever reason, the settings that I use at least, it does seem to tighten up the bottom end, which I actually quite like. Now let's see. I did feel like I needed a little EQ, so I wanted a Pultec, something they would have had back then. I don't know that they used a Pultec on the record, but I wanted something like that, a little something tubey, and I wanted the air to be extremely pleasing, not harsh, because that record, that's another thing. Listen to how much ultra top end, like 10K and above, that there isn't. And, possibly it's just because it's analog, but it's not, it's nowhere near as shiny as you think it really is. You listen to the acoustic guitars that it'll come in on the choruses and the top end air of the cymbals and the snare drum. And it was revealing to me. Let's just put it that way. Okay, let's look at what I'm doing first. We got looks like 10K, about 3 dB, and remember that Pultecs, that these numbers aren't really indicative of dB. So let's just say I've got it set to 3. Who knows what that actually is? Just set it by ear, and then on the bottom end, doing that cross trick to where it's going to hit both of them equally to get that overlapping filter shape thing. And I'm going to turn the bandwidth up all the way to broad. I'd set it and it had it in its factory default, but that seems to be my favorite right there. So I'm going to go ahead and change that. So here's what it's adding.
It's only right for you to play the way you feel it. Well, listen carefully.
Their vocal's still a little loud, so I'm going to turn that down just a little bit, but that's what that's adding. And then let's see. Let's start right here. Let's go to verse 2. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good plan. All right, so let's talk about stereo bus treatment. And I don't know what they did on the stereo bus for their compression, but in the modern era, I'm going to use an SSL overwhelmingly. There's occasions where there's other things that are better suited for certain genres and things, but you'll see what I did is the auto release and actually a fast attack, probably because of how locked in that snare drum and things was in the original, because of all the analog treatment. It was really capping it. It was setting a ceiling that mine wasn't hitting. So I think I actually did my default, 30 to 10, and then eventually just turn this up because it wasn't locking the snare drum in enough. So here's what it was doing.
Now here I go again, I see my crystal vision.
And I've got her turned down too low.
Now here I go again, I see my crystal vision.
And I'm using a little imaging.
Now here I go again, I see my crystal vision.
And I always keep a metering plug-in on my stereo bus late in the game because I want to see how hard I'm hitting my stereo bus. I want to see how hard I'm hitting analog modeled plug-ins as well as analog gear if I'm going to insert any analog equipment into the stereo bus. So what I'm looking for is to be in the red, right? I want to be around 0 for my averages with peaks kind of jumping up. When I say peaks, this isn't a peak meter, but you know what I mean. I don't mind it being in the 1 and 2 and even slapping the 3 here and there. I want that coloration of hitting my stereo bus, but I don't want to just bury the needle to where it's just setting there.
Now here I go again, I see.
Let's go up to a chorus, actually.
Only happens when it's raining. There's only
Okay, so now this is going to help bring it together a little bit too. This was, they would have been printing the analog tape, so I wanted to do something kind of similar. But what I was finding was that because I wasn't mixing into this from the very beginning, I don't think it was changing the density compared to the original. So, I believe the story is that they mixed this on a vintage Longevin, a transformerless console. And there's a lot of coloration in some ways, and maybe less than some other records from that same era because of the transformerless consoles, which I thought was interesting. But I'm going to show you in its factory default setting here how much it's affecting the sound, and you'll hear listen to what it's doing to not only the glue and the transients, but as you would expect, but also the bottom end. Check it out.
Only happens when it's raining. Players only love you when they're playing.
So I like that density. I like the weight and the glue, especially the glue and what it's doing to transients. But it's not as open sounding as it was, and not as open sounding as the original record was. I keep pointing over here when I talk about the original record. It's because if I push that button, I hear the, the original version. But anyway, all that to say, so what I ended up doing is it's turning this down until I got some of those benefits, but still open. So let me kind of show you in real time.
Only happens when it's raining. Players only love you when they're playing. Say when they will come and they.
But listen to the fatness of the snare drum, as well as where it puts the point of the snare drum. It's pretty significant what this machine is doing. You'll see I've got the 30 IPS on. I've got the 2-track, the half-inch 2-track on. But one more time, listen to the snare drum specifically. I mean, there's lots of things that it's affecting, but listen to the snare drum.
Only happens when it's raining. Players only love you when they're playing.
So I had to go back and readjust my balances a little bit. You notice at times the snare drum was too loud. Of course, I haven't done any automation yet, but that VTM, the slate tape machine, kind of locked it into a spot. And then what I did, just to check it, is I would bring in my client pleaser here, my FGX2, which I use pretty prominently on a daily basis. And what I try to do is when I'm sending it to a client, generally I bring it up to around -8. So it sounds loud and impressive, but at the same time, it's not quite mastering loud. I'm not squishing the death out, death out of it, but it makes it a lot louder, of course. So I'll also have to pop on this trim tool with it, so I'm not distorting the input of my capture device over here. So let me kind of show you what it's doing, and the metering won't really show you the -8, but trust me, that's what it's.
Only happens when it's raining. Players only love you when they're playing.
It's bouncing around, between virtually no limiting to, it looks like around a couple peaks here and there of 4 decibels that it's trimming off. I want to show you guys a couple things on the guitar, and the way I recorded it. I'm going to make it very raw, and you'll see that there's a 50. I'm giving you a 57 as well as a ribbon microphone. I don't remember what ribbon mic I used that day, to be real honest, but that's okay. So let's talk about the guitar tone a little bit here. Of course, we're hearing some reverb and things, but this is going to be the 57, which is going to be on the brighter side, because my guitar player James Mitchell is one that he likes the ribbon up there in the blend, and so the more ribbon you use, the more it affects in the cans, rather it affects the tonality of what you're doing on your guitar, right? And so the 57 on its own is a little bright, but then we also have this guy with it. So let's talk about what we did treatment-wise. I was using virtual tape machine to try to get rid of a little of that modern brightness and dynamic range. and I had it set to 2-inch 16 track. Pretty much its default settings, really. One thing we could do if we wanted to is go to 15 amps. In fact, I may try that. So this is flat, except for the filters. 100 for the low, and the low pass is set to 10K. And on the ribbon, blending it in about 50-50. And I'm not carving it away any of that low end. You'll see, I mean, it's set to 80 and 12. But what it is, it's more about the way it blends. So it adds some weight to the guitar. Let's check it out. Now they're a little loud, of course.
There's only love you when they're playing. Say when
You know what? I'm going to do a little more work on these by the time you hear it, because the original had a stereo back and forth thing happening. And I read up on it. It's like they used 4 different chains, to give it some stereo image. In fact, I think there may have been a Leslie involved. So I'll probably work on something a little bit to that nature. So one of the things about this song that's always really struck me was the acoustic guitar only coming in on the big sections and the scene change that causes. So let me let you hear our friend Carl Miner here on the acoustic. This is the Harrison 32C on the preamplifier. When you listen to the original, it's very, very thin. It's pretty much just the picky, strummy kind of thing on the original. So I kind of wanted to do something similar. You'll see I added almost 6 dB of 10K. And then on the bottom, I brought that up to around 183 cycles or so on the high pass. And I cut a couple dB of 275. So I'll let you hear it. So it's a lot more mid-range forward and top end forward. And then I was adding a little bit of compression, it looks like. And when it comes in, they were not shy with it. It's kind of loud, and it seems like it's leaning just slightly to the left. Just so many fun things. But I want you guys to get these, and remember, I cut them pretty raw. When you hear the drums and various things, there's a lot of room for you to make some EQ decisions and take them, kind of take them to the finish line that you see appropriate. I want you guys to have a blast. And remember, this is my friend Kayley Bishop. So if you do any of your own versions of mixes on this and put them on YouTube or anything else, be sure and give her a big shout out. Kayley Bishop, she'll be very happy to see it. And I'm very grateful to her for coming out and doing this. The session musicians, if you guys, you're like, these musicians are incredible. I wish I had, access to them like Joe does. You know what? You do. So down below in the description, I'll put the information to contact these guys, because they all have home studios. So you can get Scott Williamson on drums, Jacob Lowery on bass, James Mitchell on electric, Carl Miner on acoustic, and Jonathan Brown on keys, and have the same caliber of tracks that I'm getting here. But lastly, I want to thank Kayley Bishop for coming out one more time, and the SSL Harrison family for the quality of preamps that they provided for us to capture this stuff for you for education and inspirational purposes. Have a great time, guys. Have a great week. Thanks for watching.